So welcome to everyone who's tuned into our webinar, especially to hear our perspectives on how system of execution and life sciences can break silos. I'm sure most of you who've tuned in today would have heard the term system of execution if you are closely following our research. In case you haven't heard the term, do not worry. We'll make sure that you have a good understanding of what system of execution means in the context of life science industry at the tail end of this webinar. Again, I hope most of you have dialed in as we have a super power-packed agenda to speak about. We'll start off with defining what system of execution means, especially in the context of our industry, given how regulated it is. How does innovative tech and concepts like system of execution, what does that mean? And we'll follow it up with in terms of where do we see the maximum potential for system of execution across the life sciences value chain, and how could it potentially rewire everything that we know so far from a technology and technology services standpoint. And finally, we definitely do not want to just touch upon the concept, but definitely want to give you a fair amount of idea. If you want to execute this internally, what would it take and what kind of a thought process should you be holding and frameworks that you can potentially deploy. So that's what we have planned for today. But, and again, feel free to share your questions with us as we go through this webinar in the chat box. And time permitting, we will definitely take up these questions in the live Q&A part of the webinar. Now, again, especially with everything that's happening in the industry right now from a AI, generative AI and agentic AI standpoint, with the looming concerns around, growing concerns around not just around pricing standpoint, but also tariffs, I wanted to actually take a moment to talk about what's the current mindset of life sciences enterprises. So Nisarg, if you could move to the next slide. I'm going to build this out bottom up for the readers and first talk about the mindset and the trends that are guiding enterprise transformation, and then speak to the challenges behind it, right? The first piece is there's definitely a lot of expectation from enterprises in terms of doing more with less investment, be it from a dollar standpoint, time standpoint, anything that you can think of, right? So the focus really is on how do I deploy all the new age tech to drive productivity gains across the life sciences value chain. Speak about trials, how do I optimize my trial timelines, speak about commercial, how do I optimize my launch strategies, right? So there's a lot of focus on how do I really unlock the promise that the tech is really promising in terms of doing more with less investment. But I think for us as an industry to get there, there are a fair bit of challenges that we definitely need to unlock. The second piece is, while there is definitely aspirations to do more with less, we are definitely not sitting on the best data ecosystem that one would desire to unlock this value, right? So a lot of focus on how do we strengthen our data foundation so that the analytics or the AI capabilities that are sitting, that we are deploying are sitting on the right data sets, right? So the thought process is a lot more data management first approach versus AI, Gen AI first approach, so that the fundamentals are taken care of. Now, the third piece is, again, I'm sure most of you who would have joined in have either funded a Gen AI initiative or have run a Gen AI initiative. And ask yourselves in terms of how many of those have actually moved from pilot to production. When we asked our enterprise clients, only 13% of them, that's 13% of them, have successfully moved from a pilot stage to a production stage, which means they're actually questioning themselves in terms of, am I putting my money in the right direction? What do I really need to solve for so that most of these use cases, if not all, are moving from the pilot to the production stage? And lastly, again, as an industry, the life science industry, we sit on a lot of point solutions, speaks to why our data ecosystem is also fairly fragmented. So when we talk about modernizing the data landscape, we should definitely talk about integrating and modernizing the platform landscape as well. So how do we move away from fragmented systems towards a more consolidated platform perspective? We've seen the trend play out from a clinical standpoint in terms of having more end-to-end clinical development platforms. We are also seeing this play out in the CRM side, especially with the future CRM story. What does that mean in terms of not just being a system of record, but actually being a system of engagement and even further a system of execution? Now, again, these are some of the trends I believe most of the people who've joined us today would agree that you're also seeing in your enterprise conversations. But why are these the trends that we are really looking at, right? Because it speaks to the challenges that we are looking to solve for. Now, again, I will not go deep into some of these challenges, but rather try to um, bucket them into two ways. One is all the challenges that we could potentially solve for, be it end-to-end integration, data quality, uh, foundations are weak, so we are not able to fully, scale all our AI investments, right? Now, those are challenges that one can solve for having a data management first approach, having a, redefined Gen AI strategy. But then there are also challenges that one cannot influence, which is regulations around pricing, tariffs, etc. Right? So what we will try to focus on is the challenges that we could potentially solve for. And probably that's where, Nisarg, I would like to hear from you, right? In terms of what are these challenges that we system of execution could potentially solve for.
Yep. Thanks, Durga. So I'll just move to the next page, right, where we chalk out four key challenges which a lot of pharma enterprises face when they're trying to scale initiatives across different next generation technology initiatives, right? They usually fall under the either the process, tech, skill, or data focused challenges. And with the recent investments around AI, generative AI, etc., a lot of them are coming back to life. If you remember, we had similar set of challenges even when the wave of cloud, right? Cloud migration from on-prem to cloud also happened. So we're seeing a resurgence over here. But if I talk about these individually, process that usually refers to the siloed processes within various functions in an organization, which results in, say, rigid frameworks, isolated conversations, and so on and so forth. When it comes to technology debt, we're talking about legacy systems, on-prem architecture, systems which don't necessarily talk to each other very fluently, and also require a lot of complex customizations as opposed to, say, simple configurations in order to connect with each other in a way, right? And when it comes to skill debt, usually it's the unavailability of talent on next gen areas, right? So uh, when it was cloud, it was the lack of cloud SMEs. Right now, in this AI first world, it is the lack of SMEs who can truly understand the architecture of AI systems when it comes to either modernizing the tech stack, or prompt engineering, or even connecting infrastructure together. And I think this is also, a huge challenge which a lot of enterprises as well as suppliers are facing. There's a huge upskilling conversation which is going on in terms of how do we make the workforce AI ready. And finally, I think there is the data debt or the data challenge, which means that, and Durga, I think you rightly pointed out in the previous page that there is an abundance of data, but it is, sometimes poor in quality. Enterprises face the challenge of orchestrating different kinds of data sets which are spread across different functions. Some of it may be inaccessible, some of it may be there, but maintained in different kinds of formats, which all leads to a drain on, an organization's resources from a time efficiency perspective, right? Ultimately, all of these four challenges added together uh, pull back investments which have been focused on, say, true transformation, and ultimately reduces, either operational efficiencies or productivity of the workforce, right? So let's hear from the audience, right? If you were to think about the challenges which you are facing, or if you have been working with clients where you're trying to deploy a next generation technology in their environment, what according to you is the biggest challenge which you face? We'll take around 30 to 45 seconds to gather the responses. I already see responses starting to fill in. It's interesting to see that, or actually let me wait. I don't want to bias the responses, so I'll just take a couple of more seconds before I react to it.
Which one do you think will top the charts, though?
I mean, I have
So,
access to the, yeah, go ahead, Chunky.
no, I'm saying Nisarg has access to the results, right? So, but I think the results are there now, right? So I think it's surprising that actually no one selected process debt. But I think you can easily make a case for each of these four to be the biggest challenges, because if you look at life sciences organizations right now, I'm sure all of them would be facing all of these challenges, right? Processes, because uh, again, while there are established processes, but again, one of the things that we've learned, I think, first during the automation wave and now during the AI wave, is that uptake of some of these technologies is slow because the processes haven't been designed in a way which are suited for automation or suited for AI. So I think no one selecting that was a surprise, but everyone or most of the people selecting data, that is not a surprise, right? We talked about uh, that how a lot of the organizations are looking to consolidate the various applications that they have. So while I think there's, from a technology maturity perspective, while there's room for improvement, I think life sciences as an industry does, I think does okay. But the challenge is that there are so many systems. So you have data which is spread across multiple systems.
Yeah, I agree with you. Process was a surprise, right? I would have expected a few more responses over there, but aligned with respect to the data, it is one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle which needs to be solved for. Maybe that is a good segue into the next section, right? Where we talk about what is a mechanism which can help solve for it. Chunky, why don't you maybe share your perspectives on how systems of executions have evolved in the near future?
Sure. So I'll talk about systems of execution, but before I do that, I'll talk about what are the kind of systems that we have today, right? And Durga, I think towards the start of this webinar, you mentioned that how most life sciences enterprises are on a journey where they are making significant investments in AI. But I think if you ask most of them, they would say that they haven't seen the kind of ROI that they would have expected so far, right? And the challenges that Nisarg that you talked about, and I think those are the challenges that get into the way. Uh, and when we look back at it, I think if we look at one of the biggest challenges also is if you look at the way the current systems are designed, those aren't really conducive for AI to scale. And by that I mean that the systems that we have today, which are systems of record and systems of engagement, they're very good at managing data or managing interactions. What they are not very good at is execution, right? And the other limitation that I see is even the systems of record and engagement that we have today, even they operate in isolation with each other. So you have certain systems of record where you have your data stored, and then you have other systems of engagement which are largely used to engage with patients, engage with sites, engage with healthcare practitioners, right? So that's where we are. And again, if you look at each of these categories more closely, so systems of record largely to store and manage enterprise data. And if you pick any area, right, you will find multiple systems of record within that area. So if you take clinical operations and data management as an example, you have EDC, where you're collecting data which is coming from sites. So you have a system of record for that. Then you have another system of record for tracking trial milestones. So you have CTMS for that. And then you have various other systems of records. Similarly, even if you look at systems of engagement, you would have multiple systems of engagement. So some systems of engagement to engage with patients, different set of systems to engage with sites. And I think what all of this results is a huge application sprawl, which means that your data is fragmented, there's lack of real-time insights or synthesis. And what this also leads to is limited personalization, right? So I think this is one of the fundamental challenges that organizations are facing in scaling AI, that their systems aren't ready for AI to be, and particularly agentic AI to be executed at scale. And I think what sums up everything is, if you think about this, I don't think there's a shortage of insight, at least in life sciences. But there is a lack of agents, which can be humans or which can be AI, to execute on those insights, right? So I think that's the fundamental challenge that organizations are facing today, right? So you might ask, okay, what's the solution for that, right? So the solution is the system of execution. And necessarily, if you go to the next slide, which details what we mean by a system of execution, right? So I think, to put it in very simple words, a system of execution is a system that is able to act on insights autonomously. And again, it's not one more system, rather it's a link between systems of record and systems of execution, right? And there are four key characteristics of these systems. The first one is a system of execution should be able to close the gap between insights and action. So that enables the enterprise to execute at scale. The second is that it should do it by operating with a large degree of autonomy. So by that, I mean that it should have an innate capability to work off adaptive logic and learning. The third is that it is able to build adaptive logic and learn by orchestrating across multiple systems. And last but not the least is it should be able to do all of this and execute. And I think this is the fundamental difference between systems of execution and the systems which exist today. And this is crucial because, as I mentioned, right, I don't think there's any shortage of insight, but the biggest challenge is that with the current systems that we have, the insights usually resides in dashboard, or if you think about, let's say, next best action in commercial, right? There's no shortage of surfacing those insights. I think what we need is systems that can execute it autonomously and at scale. So what we need is a system of execution to activate agentic intelligence and transition from insights to execution. And necessarily, if you move to the next slide, there's a little bit of more description around what a system of execution is and how it compares with some of the traditional tools. Now, before I go into that explanation, there might be certain things that traditional tools are able to do, which are listed on the right. But the key difference is that a system of execution should be able to do all of these things and at scale, right? So, and some of the characteristics include that it should be probabilistic. It should be able to understand and interpret context and take that context from different parts of the organization from different systems. It should be able to identify real-time triggers, so which means that it should be it shouldn't be backward looking, but it should be forward looking, and it should prompt an action. It should be predictive in terms of its risk management, and it should be able to execute and interpret diverse data types, right? So these are some of the, I would say, key tenets of a system of execution and how it differs from the traditional tools and systems that we have.
Thanks, Chunky. I think that was really helpful to sort of, first understand what does system of execution mean, and also contrast it to the current systems that we are using and where do the differences exactly lie, right? I hope by now, whoever has not heard the word system of execution is fairly familiar, and Chunky has done a tremendous job at helping us understand that. So we'll move further to try and understand this a little bit more in the context of life sciences value chain, right? Now that you understand the concept, where do you see, or rather, where do we see the maximum growth that is going to come in the coming few years, right? So now let's look at the view from right from research to commercialization. Where do we believe SOE is going to drive the maximum growth? So, Nisarg, if you could move to the next slide, or rather hear from you before we share our perspectives. If you could please go ahead and help us understand, after hearing the concept of SOE, which part of the life sciences value chain do you think SOE will have the most impact? We'll try and contrast this to see if it aligns with our view or other interesting controversies that are coming up. I see few answers already flowing in. I'm a bit surprised with some of the answers, but let's see at the tail end of the poll. Maybe give us another 10 more seconds. Okay, so it's interesting to hear from the audience that you see the maximum impact, or rather, now I see one more entry into the poll. So the final results show that drug discovery and research, manufacturing operations, supply chain and distribution are ranked similar, quickly followed by clinical. To my surprise, there is no vote to sales and marketing. That is extremely surprising to me, and I would believe is surprising to Chunky and Nisarg as well. But let's go on to hear what is our take on where we believe the most and the growth is going to be coming from, right? Very interestingly, we expect the growth to come from clinical and sales and marketing. Now there are two sides to the story, right? Or rather, why we believe these are the two areas where we would see maximum growth. One is because these are the two areas where we see enterprise spend to happen most from a industry specific platform play, right? Essentially going to where, which part of the value chain do we see maximum enterprise spend coming from, especially from a platforms and a system standpoint. And that is clinical and sales and marketing driving the maximum platform and system spend. The other piece to this is, where do we see the maximum spend from the buy side from an AI, generative and agentic AI standpoint? And that's also clinical and sales and marketing. So that's exactly why we believe clinical development and sales and marketing are the two value chain segments where we are anticipating maximum, or rather a good amount of disruption and impact from this system of execution concept, right? Now, let me actually take few examples and why also further speak to why we believe these are the areas where we see maximum impact, right? Today's, again, point solutions and tools solve for, to a good extent, drawing real-time insights from the data that it is sitting on. But does it really do a proactive execution, that's where the gap is, right? So the traditional tools, to how Chunky also explained, do a good job in terms of surfacing insights, that because that's the expected outcome from these systems. But can you actually, when you think of executing things at scale, that's where the gap lies in terms of the proactive execution. And think of this not, this actually comes to much better light when you're talking about a cross-functional execution. So think about something like how, to what extent do enterprises leverage the insights from clinical trials in shaping up their launch strategies? Does the clinical development teams consistently speak to the market access and the commercial team and the marketing team in terms of game planning for their launch and commercialization strategies, right? That not necessarily, because the systems that sit behind these teams are not designed to talk to each other. The clinical development platforms and systems are designed to talk to functions within clinical. Similarly, the launch planning and execution team systems are designed to speak just within commercial. But when we are speaking about the system of execution concept, that's where the cross-functional synergies will be unlocked at the maximum, right? And not just cross-functional synergies as well, but at the same time, it will actually open up bandwidth where human intervention can be optimized, right? For example, let's take maybe lab orchestration for SA scheduling, right? An experiment has been run, but the results are not up to the mark from a QC standpoint, right? Can actually the agent or the system proactively schedule the next experiment and log the lab resources and equipment, so that you're not waiting for a human to review the results that are subpar QC and then planning for the next experiment, but actually proactively executing the next intervention, which is already scheduling the next assay that is needed, as per the research plan, right? Now, this is one example in discovery and research, but you can also look at similar examples in manufacturing, supply chain, and sales and marketing as well. Given the audience have taken, poll has been more manufacturing and supply chain, I might actually want to lean on to some of the examples there. Let's take the cold chain monitoring and autonomous rerouting, right? Now, let's say basis the weather update and the new route plan, we have expected that the expected time for the shipment to reach has significantly increased, right? Now, the current systems only flag that the shipment will not reach on time, but they are not able to proactively reroute and create a new logistics plan, right? And that's where system of execution will come into the picture, where it will not just predict that this is not going to reach on time, but also actually give a solution, proactively execute the alternative solution, making sure that the business objectives are being met in a way, right? Now, I hope that sort of these examples help clarify the concept and give few examples for you to also picture this in action. Given that sales and marketing and clinical development are the two areas, given the platform-centric play that we see in these particular value chain segments, we'll actually pick more targeted examples to walk you through the entire journey in specific use cases. So let's go with the first sales and marketing use case around intelligent omni-channel engagement. And Nisarg, if you could move to the next slide. In the current, we'll do a view first, that is the current scenario, right, where we believe it is extremely fragmented, and then we'll move on to the view which is a more connected, or rather an orchestrated view in the system of execution scenario. So first, let's speak about the current scenario that we are in, right? When one is planning, when a marketing team or a commercial team is planning their next campaign, the way that they would typically go about is, depending on the brand that they are running this campaign for, they would define very specific campaign objectives, particularly targeting the brand and the HCP segments that the brand would want to target, right? And then more, they'll be sitting on these systems that are only integrated within the commercial function, not necessarily speaking to other parts of the enterprise landscape, and use the insights and data from those systems to deploy certain engagement strategies. Now, given that the current systems and the analytics and AI tools are more rule-based and static-based, that's where the engagement strategies end up being more passive in nature. And what do we mean by that is it doesn't proactively take into account where is the customer right now in terms of its engagement journey, right? Is this HCP someone who's a true proponent of the brand? Or is this an HCP who's someone on the edge about the brand, right? Accordingly, you would want to personalize the campaign, but unfortunately, given the current systems that we leverage, this is more of a passive engagement strategy, which very specific omni-channel engagement plan, or rather follow-up plan that are more reactive in a way that you're waiting for the end customer to engage you rather than you deploying more push engagement strategies, right? And to sort of close this up, we also do not use a lot of feedback on, say, day one of the campaign to consistently improve what could day 2 or day 3 also look like. So there's a lack of effective feedback loop to further refine the engagement strategies depending on who's interacting with the campaign and who isn't interacting with. Now, that's the current scenario. Well, what's the outcome? Probably you are on the radar of the HCPs that you are ideally planning to, but you're not necessarily driving a lot of impact for HCPs who are rather on the edge about the brand or know very little about the brand, right? And this is essentially means it's only helping with existing customer base and doing little to nothing in terms of onboarding a new or influencing the net new customer base. Now let's look at this in the context of system of execution, right? And that's where you would see as I complete the entire engagement scenario, you will see that the outcomes will be such that it not only engages the current customer base better, but it will also push and personalize strategies for HCPs that are on the edge or have a limited perspective about the brand. So when we're looking at the coordinated omni-channel execution through the concept of SOE, this is where the engagement goals are not just designed keeping in mind the specific brand or the specific target HCP segments, but also in a way tie these up to the overall engagement objectives of the organization. And that's when you fundamentally start thinking about engagement beyond one's brand and beyond one's own function. That's where you are opening up the room for cross-function integrations beyond commercial as well, right? Which means that you will be unifying data with other functions as well, which essentially means this HCP could have actually been a KOL for you earlier, right? Could have been a site participant during the clinical trial stage as well. So you're actually unifying data beyond the commercial function, going into market access, going into clinical as well, unifying all the data about that customer, actually deploying a true picture of the customer, using which you are creating a more adaptive stakeholder engagement plan. So here that means you have a more well-rounded context. And you're also using a lot of real-time signals in terms of, what kind of research content have they been publishing lately, what kind of engagement, what kind of content of the organization have they been engaging with, to not just understand where they are in the customer engagement journey, but also push them forward in that overall experience in terms of their interactions with the enterprise. So this essentially opens up room or the scope of engagement, not just within the function, like I mentioned, but having a more cross-functional scenario that now that the role of, as and when the role of the HCP evolves further in engagement journey, the enterprise is better positioned to serve their needs, right? And finally, there is also a real-time feedback loop, which takes into account how the HCP has been engaging with you through the specific campaign, so that there are real-time tweaks happening, be it in terms of the channel that needs to be deployed or the content that needs to be deployed to engage this particular customer. So again, I hope that gives you a little bit more context into how the coordinated omni-channel execution differs from the fragmented omni-channel execution, and what kind of impact does are you able to drive for your customers when operating in a fragmented scenario versus an enterprise-wide coordinated scenario. Now, we've talked about commercial, so we definitely want to also speak to you about a similar use case from a clinical standpoint, and that's where Nisarg, I would like to invite you.
Yeah, thanks, Durga. So, similar to how you lead this out in the commercial value chain, we also have a process in site feasibility study. So, I'll talk to you about how it's traditionally done without, say, a system of execution, right? So, usually the clinical teams define what's the ideal site profile, and there are diverse databases which they refer to in order to identify the sites, which could be spread across EMRs, registries, internal databases. They may have also worked with sites previously, right? So there may be different teams which have an understanding of how the site performance have been for, say, previous phase 2, phase 3 studies. So all of that data is one aggregated across different data silos, and two may also be available through other sources like EMRs and registries, which all needs to be brought together. So there isn't a single source of truth or single view. It's usually fragmented. And once the study teams have zeroed down on, the sites, the potential sites to invite, there is this, a process of initiation through emails, phones, etc., in order to confirm whether sites would like to participate in the study and also validate all of these information. And finally, given there's a bi-directional exchange of data, we also have feasibility managers trying to compile all of the incoming site data manually. There may be possibilities of error with respect to what is being sent out, what is coming in, given this is a highly manual process. And finally, what usually happens is the final shortlists are selected, and and there is the site activities which usually involve the contracting, patient recruitment plan, document creation, and so on, which are being triggered. Uh, as you would see, there's a lot of manual effort involved over here. Data is spread across silos, and it is a time-consuming process given that you're relying on multiple sites to come back to you, and also orchestrating this through, say, feasibility managers. But if you think about how a similar use case through a system of execution would transform, think about the same study teams trying to define the site feasibility goals internally, and aligning the system of execution to the objectives. Then the system of execution actually integrates all the data in real time across different platforms. So we still have siloed solutions, but the SOE is actually orchestrating all the data into a single source of truth and creating an environment for data which is taken from, say, claims data, investigator databases, CROs, and partner channels, as well as the existing data sets which they've traditionally used, like EMRs, registries, etc. Uh, and then, based on the feasibility goals, objectives which have been set in the system, the system of execution then proceeds to dynamically score sites based on the predetermined criteria, and can also incorporate the history of engagement for, say, a couple of sites they may have worked with. And this really leads to a prioritization exercise, which is to some extent highly automated, and also involves a lot of the clinical study teams focusing on not dashboarding and reporting, but actually decisioning logic in terms of what is the reason or what is the ranking criteria for slides, and who should be the one which is selected. Once I think the finalization has happened, the system of execution turns the insights into actionable outcomes, which is then, used to initiate site outreach. All of this can also be automated via multiple agents which are, involved in the system. So agents which can take the ownership of outreach, which can take the ownership of activation as well as coordination between sites. So, of course, there is going to be human intervention here. It won't be completely automated. But what an SOE does is strip the highly manual and laborious processes and really give back control to the feasibility managers and study teams to focus on strategic work such as creation of the contracting, patient recruitment plan documents, and other strategic work. So over here as well, you'll see that the SOE over time becomes more effective and efficient as they get trained on the logic as well as collaborations between study and site teams. I think with this example, we'll also try to explore what it means for pharma enterprises to look at success. What are the dimensions through which success can be viewed, and how should organizations think about getting more value from systems of executions going forward? So, um, we discussed the four challenges which prevent organizations from truly realizing the objectives from a large scale digital transformation exercise, right? It was the process debt, the tech debt, the skill debt, as well as the data debt. So ideally, life sciences enterprises need to think about building capabilities in order to move towards systems of execution. And there are four fundamental capabilities which are in play. One is the data layer, the second is the decisioning layer, the third is the process layer, and the fourth is the security, governance, and compliance layer. When it comes to data activation, it is important to realize that a lot of the data might still sit across various silos, but it is important to think about uh, investing in a data fabric which can ingest data in real time to fuel the conversations in various workflows. This is the dictionary which will ideally unify the different sources of data into a single environment, which can then be used to support real-time coordination and go beyond just basic data integration as well. I think there was a question from the audience as well, which we had received in advance, in terms of does a unified data fabric help, or is it fundamental to closing the gap across disjointed systems? So data fabric is actually one of those orchestration layers which can really help unify processes, workflows, and decisions. The second investment layer is the decisioning layer, which is, once you have all the data in a single place, uh, how do you operationalize it and how do you make it more context aware and give it more autonomy in terms of decision making? I think the key question to consider over here is, where do you consider a human in the loop approach? Where do you consider where do you consider a human over the loop approach, and where do you consider no human presence and a complete automation of various processes? I think it is also important to note that most pharma enterprises won't really immediately pivot to a human out of the loop approach. You will still need some degree of intervention across various processes. So that is what you need to solve for and understand how much involvement is required from resources. The third is process orchestration. In order to make intelligent, context-aware decisions, the teams also need to be aware about how they can shift from reviewing static reports to responding to signals from agents. So this also means that some processes would need to be automated so as to enable it. legacy migrations from legacy to cloud-based systems and processes are useful over here. But all of those would ultimately lead to on-the-fly decision making as well as responses from the system of execution. And finally, the last investment is around security and compliance. It is one of the most important conversations, which I think not just pharma, but a lot of other industries are also having as they go down this route of a system of execution. Because you're ultimately looking at nuances of identity and access management. You're trying to change or enhance enterprise policies with respect to how data sharing is enforced, and also ensure that there is a right review and audit mechanism so as to look at what are the kinds of decisions which the AI made and look at how to enforce or uh, improve them in the future. Uh, we've also tried to position a couple of nuances with respect to enterprises looking to go into a system of execution transformation exercise. We have five pillars over here from a near-term focus as well as a long-term focus. The first is the unified engagement data fabric. In the short, I spoke about the importance of a data fabric and what it can do to enterprises which have multiple data nets in their environment, right? So, in the near term, it is important to bring together all of those data interfaces into a data fabric. But in the long term, I think it is imperative that the enterprise-wide data merges into this data fabric, which means that you need to invest in, creating a dictionary of sorts, which can understand the various metadata across, multiple silos of data you may have, and ultimately ensure that all departments and functions speak similar languages. With respect to intelligent orchestration, we are focusing on how do you make the engines more context aware, get more accuracy out of those engines, and also ensure that the decisions or outcomes are going towards or trending towards fully autonomous engagement routes triggered through human over the loop approaches. And the third one is with respect to adaptive workflows, which is once you have an idea of which workflows will require significant upgrades or automations, how do you think about handling high risk use cases through dynamic execution, as well as incorporating an interrupt based process for uh, nuances where the algorithm doesn't really give you the best output or accuracy as well. With respect to partner ecosystem, we're looking at the partners which a CRO, which a pharma will be working with, which could be the CRO ecosystem, the product provider ecosystem, sites, as well as other agencies over here. So they also need to integrate into the system of execution, and it is important to develop or co-develop some of these capabilities along with external stakeholders so as to reap maximum benefits as well. And finally, I think there is the conversation around talent and governance. Uh, it goes without saying that change management is important, and teams need to be equipped with respect to how they are consistently and continuously improving as the system of execution evolves. The near-term focus is supposed to be around, planning for role-based training programs and having them in place. But the long-term focus is to ensure that uh, the enterprise client has an AI-ready workforce, which can smoothly and continuously integrate with the system of execution layer. So I think that brings us to an end of the content which we had to share. There were a couple of questions which we had also received in the chat. So maybe now's the time we can take to address some of those questions.
Yeah, I think there were a few interesting questions. Let's start with the one which is around what is the difference between the functionalities of system of execution and customer data platforms? Chunky, would you like to take that?
Yeah, so, and again, if you think about customer data platforms, the way we look at it, they're largely a system of record, right? So they're a foundation data layer which brings together or creates a single view of a customer, right? So we see that as a system of record. And while a system of execution will automate as well as orchestrate real-time decisions and actions across the organization.
I hope that answered the question. The other question we received is how do you propose closing the gap across disjointed systems? Now, I hope when we spoke to the system of execution concept that sort of clarified this. As you're thinking about system of execution, that solves for the workflows that are not connected not within functions and also across the different functions, right? For example, clinical and commercial. These are again to Chunky's point earlier we saw that process that was not even highlighted as a challenge, right? And I saw an interesting comment in the chat box that typical feeling is that our processes are unique and as per our best practices. But again, when these processes were designed, they were never designed keeping in mind how AI or automation could work, right? So I think that's where system of execution comes in. Even if your processes are not designed to speak to each other, the system of execution will be that enabling execution layer, which will help enterprise systems talk to each other, not just within their own functions, but across other functions as well. I think looking at the time at hand, we'll probably take one last question. And Nisarg, I'm going to direct that to you because it's around clinical. Are there
Yeah.
any specific use cases in clinical development, specifically around EDC and other related systems?
Sure. So I think none of the providers um, have productionized use cases on SOEs yet, right? But we have seen a lot of demos and pilots with respect to conversational agents. Those point to generative AI algorithms, but we do have an understanding of what potential system of execution use cases can come across a few e-clinical solutions. For example, if you pick a randomization system, once say you focus on adaptive re-randomization, you can automatically trigger a supply request from a depot to a site, right? And if you think about risk-based quality management, that's another area where you can automatically trigger a safety case report form creation if, say, a couple of parameters go above a particular threshold. So I think these are all use cases which have been in play, but just require an execution layer on top of the engagement layer so as to automatically trigger uh, an alert to specific study teams in order to start reacting to some of the incoming data, or at times also execute on them based on the incoming data. For example, the case report form can already be created once the data comes in, and then of course the safety case managers, etc., may pick up on that and use other workflows to start navigating around those nuances. So these are just some examples, but a lot of this automation plus what Chunky spoke about earlier, right, which is a combination of a system of engagement and a system of execution comes into play for product providers and organizations.
And thanks, Nisarg. That sounds fun to see that a part of what your job is already done for you before you even start on it, right? So again, anyone who's joined in, if you still have questions, please feel free to send those up as part of a follow-up. You can request a complimentary briefing depending on the question that you have, depending on which part of the life sciences value chain that you are wanting to look at, or a even more broader question. Please feel free to share your question with us and connect with us. And to everyone who's joined the webinar, you will be receiving an email with instructions to access not just the presentation, but also the recording 2 to 3 days post the event. So do look out for that. And Nisarg, if you could move further, like I mentioned, anyone who has an additional question, please feel free to reach out. There's a complimentary briefing that you could access as part of this webinar. And I also want to take a minute to speak about some of our upcoming events in Dallas, especially in September, which is about a couple of weeks from now. The slide that shows up on the screen is about the 2025 Dallas Engage event, which is happening between September 8th and 10th. And the next slide talks about our Elevate event, which is also happening in the month of September. In case you're looking for specific details, please feel free to visit our website, and that should give you everything that you need to know about the event. And with that, thank you all who've joined the webinar. I hope you found this helpful and you've sort of unpacked the system of execution concept from a life sciences standpoint. In case of any questions, yet again, feel free to reach out, but thank you for joining in.